Hello everyone, Nolan West here. It is official, the surplus has risen from the dead, but it's more Frankenstein than Lazarus. I'll explain why. Minnesota now has a $1.6 billion projected budget surplus. This is nearly a $3 billion swing from the last budget projection. And going back to November, state economists projected a $1.3 billion budget deficit. And the forecast before that one, they projected a $2.4 billion budget deficit. And going back even further to just before the pandemic, they projected a $1.5 billion surplus. So all in all, we're basically back where we started, aren't we? No, we are not. This is a Frankenstein economy. The economy didn't simply shake off this pandemic. The pandemic killed it. The federal government has spent trillions with a T to try and bring the economy back to life. Think of it like Victor Frankenstein zapping his monster to life. That's not really alive. The federal money is largely responsible for this surplus, not a healthy economy. So while the federal money helped businesses and individuals stay afloat during this time, this surplus is not reflective of a healthy economy. Most of this money was printed out of thin air. So let's look at where this surplus really came from. Going back to March 2020, Congress passed the CARES Act, spending $2.2 trillion. Then in December, Congress passed a $900 billion relief package. So if you look at just those two bills, the federal government has injected over $3 trillion into the economy in response to COVID. And on top of that, the House just passed a $1.9 trillion relief bill. So add that to the stack. These are insanely large numbers. We have never printed this much money in such a short time. And let's put this massive spending into perspective so you can really understand it. The GDP of our entire country, which is the largest in the world, is $21.43 trillion. If Congress spends another $1.9 trillion, the federal government will have spent about a quarter of our entire country's GDP just in COVID relief money. There will be consequences like that from this. We can't pretend like this won't lead to serious issues in the near future. We could see levels of inflation that we haven't seen in a half century. The rest of the money in our surplus comes from reduced spending by the state government. We are spending $165 million less on K through 12 education and $257 million less in health and human services. The reduction in education spending comes from kids leaving school because of distance learning. I mean, we've all heard a million stories about this. But why does that, in particular, lead to lower school spending by state government? Don't we just said it? So schools are a little different than most parts of state government. They're funded on a per pupil basis. So with more kids going to private schools or being homeschooled, the school funding formula allocates less money. And as for the $257 million reduction in health and human services spending, that again is from the federal government. During emergencies, the federal government pays a larger share of child care assistance and Medicaid, which is the reason we see the bulk of this $257 million reduction in spending. The state has also seen higher tax collections across the board, with the exception of the income tax, obviously, with the job losses. Again, this largely comes from the federal government yet again. It's all the money just being injected into the economy. And two of the biggest drivers here were the stimulus checks sent to individuals by the federal government and the $600 bump in unemployment benefits as well. Those funds were immediately put into the economy and spent. And as a result, the state sees more tax revenue. The state is also taxing the billions in paycheck protection loans that the federal government gave to businesses to try and keep them alive during the pandemic, which is utterly ridiculous. So the state's books look great, but our economy is a walking corpse. everyone is going to pay for this spending in money printing and inflation. Prices will go up and your salary will be worth less. We must not compound that problem that is certainly on the forefront by raising taxes. The state needs to take this windfall and help those who have been harmed most by the pandemic because it hasn't been spread evenly. And after all, that's what the federal money that created this surplus was for in the first place, helping people. While state budgets might seem robust and the stock market's at all-time highs, we have to remember that our unemployment rate is still nearly double what it was when the pandemic first started. And our labor force participation rate is at 61.4%. The last time it was that low was 1976. And what that means is that a meaningful part of our declining unemployment rate, which is good, is just people who have stopped even looking for work. And that's a problem. The obvious first step here is to eliminate taxes on the paycheck protection loans. The money businesses got from the federal government so they could just scrape by shouldn't go to the state government. It was meant for those businesses. The fact that we tax it is completely outrageous. We also need to help those who lost their jobs to the pandemic and help the hospitality industry in particular get back on its feet. 498,000 hospitality workers' jobs were destroyed just in the month of December. 498,000. So that's the situation the state is in right now. We have a surplus again, but it isn't a reflection of a healthy economy. The economy is a dead man walking. So let's use this $1.6 billion surplus to help those who have been devastated by the pandemic at no fault of their own. We don't need to be raising taxes. The economy's already dead. Let's not bury it.